November 12, 1942. The Western Desert, North Africa. The captured American vehicle sat, abandoned near a destroyed British supply column, its crew having fled when their position became untenable. Standard Wehrmacht procedure dictated destroying it or leaving it behind. But the reconnaissance unit's commanding officer had other ideas. Get our best mechanic. I want to know if we can use this thing. What the Afrika Korps mechanics discovered in the next 30 minutes would challenge everything they believed about German superiority. The realization didn't come as a thunderbolt, but as a creeping understanding that grew with each inspection. The small placard on the dash read Willys MB. The Americans called it a Jeep. The first revelation came when they opened the hood. The engine compartment was immaculate, designed for rapid maintenance by anyone with basic mechanical knowledge. Color-coded wires, clearly labeled components, accessible parts that could be reached without specialized tools. In 2 decades of servicing German military vehicles, the senior mechanic had never seen such thoughtful engineering for field maintenance. Every bolt was standard. Every component appeared identical to every other vehicle of its type, designed for mass production and easy replacement. The Godevil engine displaced 134 cubic inches and produced 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. Not impressive by German standards, but the engineering philosophy behind it was revolutionary. This engine wasn't built to be perfect. It was built to be simple, reliable, and, above all, producible. A mechanic with minimal training could service this engine with basic tools. No specialty wrenches. No complex procedures requiring factory-trained technicians. The Americans had apparently designed this vehicle, expecting that farm boys and factory workers would need to maintain it under combat conditions. By November 1942, the contrast between American and German military vehicle philosophy had become stark. America would produce over 640,000 Jeeps during the war. Germany would manage just over 50,000 Kübelwagens. More troubling still was what this disparity represented. The Jeep embodied American manufacturing thinking at its finest. Standardized, simplified, designed for mass production by semi-skilled workers using interchangeable parts. The officers approached as the mechanics continued their inspection. Well, can we use it? The senior mechanic looked up, choosing his words carefully. This vehicle is remarkable. It's designed by someone who understands field conditions. One officer frowned. German engineering is the finest in the world. The mechanic didn't argue. He simply gestured to the four-wheel drive system. Look at this transfer case. A single lever engages four-wheel drive. One lever. Our Kübelwagens require multiple operations, and most don't have four-wheel drive at all. The Wehrmacht's primary light vehicle, the Volkswagen Type 82 Kübelwagen, was an excellent machine in many respects. Ferdinand Porsche had designed it with typical German attention to detail. It was lighter than the Jeep, used less fuel, and its air-cooled engine eliminated the vulnerability of radiators to enemy fire. But it had one critical weakness. It was rear-wheel drive only. In the soft sand of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, the mud of Russia, that limitation proved devastating. The Jeep, by contrast, could power all four wheels whenever needed. The system was so simple that an uneducated soldier could master it in minutes. The mechanics continued their inspection. The suspension used simple leaf springs, crude, compared to the Kübelwagens' sophisticated torsion bars, but infinitely easier to repair in the field. The electrical system was basic but robust. The fuel system could run on almost any grade of gasoline without modification. Most troubling of all was the weight distribution. The Jeep weighed approximately 2,450 pounds, compared to the Kübelwagens' 1,540 pounds, a difference of 910 pounds. German engineers would have considered this excess weight a flaw, reducing performance and increasing fuel consumption. But the mechanics recognized the method behind the apparent madness. That extra weight translated to durability. The frame was overbuilt, designed to handle punishment that would destroy lighter vehicles. The Americans had decided that reliability under abuse mattered more than optimal efficiency. They had built a vehicle expecting it to be misused, overloaded, and subjected to conditions no engineer would approve of, and engineered it to survive anyway. This wasn't the American incompetence that Wehrmacht training films had promised. This was engineering focused on reality rather than theory. The unit brought the Jeep back to their forward position. Over the next 3 days, mechanics conducted exhaustive tests. They drove it through soft sand where Kübelwagens struggled. They loaded it beyond its rated capacity. They subjected it to abuse that would have crippled most vehicles. The Jeep absorbed everything. In soft terrain where rear-wheel drive vehicles required careful driving and often became stuck, the Jeep simply powered through. The low-range gearing allowed it to crawl over obstacles at walking speed, something the Kübelwagens' gearing couldn't match despite its reduction hubs. Word spread through the Afrika Korps. The Americans had a vehicle that outperformed the Wehrmacht's equivalent in almost every meaningful way. Officers and mechanics from other units came to examine it. The reactions followed a predictable pattern. Initial skepticism followed by grudging respect, then dismay as the implications became clear. One supply officer who had worked in German automotive plants before the war spent an afternoon studying the vehicle. His assessment was blunt. This represents a fundamental difference in approach. We build vehicles to achieve engineering perfection. The Americans build them to be manufactured. In total war, that matters more. He explained to the assembled officers and NCOS what that difference meant. Look at this. Engine block is cast, not machined to fine tolerances. The Americans sacrifice a small amount of performance for massive gains in production speed. They can train a semi-skilled worker to assemble one of these engines in a fraction of the time it takes to build a German engine. Now multiply that across every component. He pointed to the stamped metal body panels. These panels are crude compared to our vehicles, but they can be produced by the thousands in factories that previously made household appliances. The Americans have mobilized their entire economy. Every refrigerator factory, every washing machine plant, every commercial vehicle manufacturer, all converted to military production. We cannot match this capacity. The officers fell silent. He had articulated what many had begun to suspect. Germany's philosophy focused on quality, and precision made sense in peacetime. But in total war, the American approach of adequate Products delivered quickly was proving devastatingly effective. One mechanic spent that evening writing a detailed technical report. He documented every aspect of the Jeep's design, noting both its strengths and weaknesses. The report made its way up the chain of command, one of thousands of such documents produced by German technical intelligence services. Similar reports were flooding into Wehrmacht headquarters from every front. German mechanics and engineers were encountering American vehicles and equipment with increasing frequency, and the assessments were uniformly troubling. The Americans were outproducing Germany by ratios that seemed impossible. In late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence commissioned a study of Allied vehicle production. American shipyards were launching Liberty ships faster than Germany could sink them. The statistics revealed a sobering truth. America's 1942 military vehicle production exceeded the total production of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Production was still ramping up. The captured Jeep became something of a celebrity in its unit. Soldiers competed for the chance to drive it. Officers used it for forward reconnaissance, trusting its reliability more than their own vehicles. When parts wore out, replacement components were scavenged from other captured Jeeps with disconcerting ease. Everything was interchangeable. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps had captured dozens of Jeeps. Wehrmacht mechanics formed informal networks, sharing maintenance knowledge and scrounged parts. A black market emerged for captured American vehicles and equipment. A working Jeep could command prices far exceeding its theoretical value because everyone recognized its superiority for desert warfare. Then came May 13, 1943, when the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners. Their war was over, but their education in American manufacturing capacity was just beginning. The contrast between German and American capabilities became impossible to ignore during the journey to captivity. American trucks transported prisoners in quantities that would have required horse-drawn wagons in the Wehrmacht. American Liberty ships, typically built in 5 to 6 weeks at peak production in 1943, compared to 8 months initially, carried thousands across the Atlantic. Every aspect of the logistical operation demonstrated organizational capacity that dwarfed anything Germany had achieved. At the prisoner processing center in Oran, Algeria, captured mechanics watched American motor pool sergeants service a fleet of vehicles with casual efficiency that would have been impossible in the Wehrmacht. The motor pool contained dozens of Jeeps, trucks, and command cars. Young American soldiers, many barely out of their teens, performed maintenance with speed and confidence. Tools were abundant and readily available. Parts were delivered without requisition delays. Every vehicle used the same basic components, allowing mechanics to service any vehicle without specialized knowledge. One American sergeant, who spoke passable German, noticed a captured mechanic watching. "You a mechanic?" "I was. Afrika Korps vehicle maintenance?" The sergeant grinned. "Well, no war for you now, but I bet you got questions. Come on, I'll show you around. Not like you can steal anything anymore." What followed was an educational afternoon. The sergeant walked him through the motor pool, explaining American maintenance philosophy with unguarded honesty. "See, the thing is, We design everything so any farm boy can fix it. Most of our guys never saw a vehicle engine before basic training, so we make it simple. Color, coded wires, standard bolts, everything labeled. We got manuals written for 6th grade reading. Levels. The idea is that if something breaks, anyone can fix it without calling in a specialist. The captured mechanic examined a disassembled Jeep engine. Every component was clearly marked. The maintenance manual contained detailed illustrations and step-by-step instructions that could be followed by someone with minimal mechanical knowledge. How many of these do you produce? The sergeant shrugged. Hell, I don't know exact numbers, but thousands every week, I guess. They keep coming off the production lines faster than we can ship them to you. We got so many Jeeps that if one breaks down, we usually just grab another one instead of fixing it. Immediately, thousands every week. The number seemed impossible, yet the evidence was everywhere. The motor pool contained more vehicles than entire German divisions had possessed, and this was just one small American unit at a forward supply base. The sergeant continued the tour. Dodge trucks, capable of hauling loads that would require 2 German vehicles. Half-track personnel carriers produced in quantities that made German equivalents seem like rarities. Tank transporters that could move armor without wearing out their tracks. Thing is, we learned from the last war. We build everything with common components. A bolt from a Jeep fits a truck fits a half-track. Same with electrical parts, hydraulic systems, everything. Makes logistics simple. Instead of needing 1,000 different parts, we need maybe a couple 100, and we produce them by the millions. This was the secret that German manufacturing had never fully grasped. Component commonality wasn't just about production efficiency. It was about creating a logistical ecosystem where any part could be used anywhere, any mechanic could service any vehicle, and the entire system reinforced itself. The journey from North Africa to American prison camps continued the education. At every stop, prisoners witnessed American production capacity operating at a scale that defied German preconceptions. The port at Norfolk, Virginia, processed thousands of tons of supplies daily with mechanical efficiency. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at speeds that would have required armies of workers in Hamburg. Trains carried prisoners across America in passenger coaches that would have been luxury in Germany, and everywhere were vehicles. Cars filled parking lots outside factories. Trucks lined highways in convoys that stretched for miles. Military vehicles sat in depot yards by the thousands, awaiting shipment to combat zones. At Camp Hearne, Texas, skilled mechanics volunteered for the motor pool. American camp commanders welcomed their expertise because the war effort demanded every available worker. For the next 2 years, German mechanics worked alongside American soldiers, maintaining the vehicles that kept the camp running. American mechanics approached vehicle maintenance with direct practicality. They weren't engineers striving for perfection. They were problem solvers focused on keeping equipment operational. When something broke, they fixed it quickly with whatever was available. When parts weren't available, they improvised. When a vehicle proved unrepairable, they cannibalized it for components and requested a replacement, which arrived within days rather than weeks. The captured mechanics observed American techniques closely. German mechanics were trained to maintain vehicles to factory specifications, requiring specialized tools and proper procedures. American mechanics were trained to keep things running by any means necessary. In peacetime conditions, German methods produced better results. In wartime chaos, American methods proved vastly more effective. The motor pool at Camp Hearne processed hundreds of vehicles monthly. Jeeps came in for routine maintenance, received service in hours rather than days, and returned to service. The efficiency came from parts abundance and component interchangeability. When a part needed replacement, the parts room had dozens in stock. When a tool was required, the tool room provided it immediately. When a vehicle was beyond repair, another one took its place. One German mechanic befriended an American soldier who had worked for Ford before the war. The American proved knowledgeable about the automotive sector. Before the war, I worked on the assembly line at Willow Run. That's Ford's bomber plant, outside Detroit, biggest factory in the world. We're building B-24 Liberators. Started production in '42, and by the time I got drafted last year, we were completing one bomber every hour. Every single hour, a complete 4-engine heavy bomber rolled off that line. The arithmetic was staggering. 24 bombers per day, over 700 per month. How is such production possible? Mass production principles. Mr. Ford figured out how to break down complex manufacturing into simple, repeatable steps. You don't need skilled craftsmen if every worker does one simple task repeatedly. A kid fresh off the farm can be trained in a week to install one type of bolt in one location. Do that with 1,000 workers and you get massive output. This was the fundamental difference. German production relied on skilled craftsmen building quality products in moderate quantities. American production relied on semi-skilled workers building adequate products in massive quantities. The American continued. Same thing with Jeeps. Willys Overland makes them. So does Ford. Both plants use identical specifications. Apart from a Willys Jeep fits a Ford Jeep perfectly. They're completely interchangeable. That means if one plant gets bombed or has problems, the other keeps producing. Maintenance is simple because every mechanic learns one vehicle, not dozens of variants. The German mechanic thought about the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory. Dozens of different truck types from different manufacturers, each with unique parts and maintenance requirements. Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from various sources, captured vehicles from across Europe, each requiring its own spare parts and knowledge base. German logistics were a nightmare of incompatible systems. American logistics were streamlined through uniformity. The real genius is that we designed for manufacturability from the start. When they put out the requirements for the Jeep back in '40, they gave companies just 75 days to produce a prototype. American Bantam did it in 49 days. Then Willys and Ford refined the design for mass production. Everything had to be simple to manufacture, simple to maintain, and simple to repair. The captured mechanics had examined enough Jeeps to recognize this truth. The vehicle wasn't elegant. German engineers would have designed something more sophisticated. But sophistication impeded mass production. And mass production was winning the war. By summer of 1944, prisoners had heard rumors of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. When news arrived of the landing's success, many felt no surprise. The Allies had the manufacturing capacity to build an invasion fleet that would have taken Germany years to assemble. News filtered into the camps through American newspapers and radio broadcasts. They read accounts of the Normandy beaches, where Allied forces had landed, with thousands of vehicles in the first wave alone. Jeeps, trucks, tanks, amphibious vehicles, all carried across the English Channel in purpose-built landing craft, themselves manufactured by the thousands. The scale of the operation defied comprehension. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. Within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be fighting in Europe, all supplied by a production base that created equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. German prisoners reflected on their pre-war confidence in victory. That confidence had been based on assumptions about German technological superiority. Those assumptions proved incomplete. Germany had superior engineering in many areas. German tanks were more heavily armored and better armed than most American equivalents. German aircraft were often more sophisticated. German small arms were excellent, but none of that mattered when America could produce 5 tanks for every one Germany built, 10 trucks for every German truck, 100 Jeeps for every Kübelwagen. In the motor pool one afternoon, prisoners watched American soldiers loading Jeeps onto transport trucks for shipment to the port. A young private drove each Jeep up the loading ramps with casual confidence. Dozens of vehicles loaded in less than an hour, all bound for Europe to replace losses and supply new units. One German mechanic realized that this single loading operation, at one camp in Texas, represented more vehicles than his entire division had possessed in North Africa. This scene was being repeated at camps and depots across America every single day. The mathematics became inescapable. Germany had mobilized its economy for total war, stripping civilian production to support military manufacturing. Yet German military vehicle production in 1943 totaled less than 100,000 units of all types. America, maintaining a thriving civilian economy, produced over 2 million military vehicles the same year. The disparity wasn't just quantitative, it was qualitative. American vehicles were designed for wartime realities, ease of maintenance, interchangeable parts, simple operation, and rugged reliability. German vehicles were engineered to specifications that made sense in peacetime but proved impractical in sustained combat. In November 1944, news reached the camp of a German offensive in the Ardennes, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last gamble in the West. The offensive relied heavily on capturing American fuel supplies because Germany no longer had sufficient fuel to sustain armored operations. More troubling were reports of Operation Grief, Otto Skorzeny's commando operation using captured American equipment. German soldiers had been equipped with captured jeeps, American uniforms, and fake identification, tasked with infiltrating Allied lines to cause confusion and capture bridges. Even Skorzeny, Hitler's favorite commando who had rescued Mussolini, was reduced to depending on captured American vehicles because German vehicles were insufficient. That revealed everything about the Wehrmacht's material situation. The operation failed. American military police quickly identified the German infiltrators through careful questioning about American culture and procedures. The Ardennes offensive itself ground to a halt, not primarily from American resistance, though that was fierce, but because German forces ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned their tanks when fuel trucks failed to arrive. Infantry divisions resorted to horse-drawn transport because motorized logistics had collapsed. By January 1945, the German attack had been contained and reversed. Spring of 1945 brought news of Germany's collapse. The Red Army closed on Berlin from the east. American and British forces crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany from the west. In the Camp motor pool, German mechanics continued their work, maintaining vehicles for an army that had defeated their homeland. They felt no satisfaction in their work, but no shame either. Germany had lost not because its soldiers lacked courage or skill, but because it had challenged powers whose production capacity it could never match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier approached with news. Germany surrendered. War's over in Europe. The mechanics nodded. They had expected this for months. What happens to us now? You'll go home eventually. Probably not immediately. Lots of logistics to work out. But you'll go home. One mechanic considered this. Home to a Germany that had been bombed into rubble, occupied by foreign armies, its cities destroyed by the same manufacturing might that had produced the Jeep he had examined. Years ago, the American asked, "You're a smart guy. Did you really think Germany could win?" The mechanic thought carefully about his answer. Before the war, yes. We believed German quality would overcome American quantity. We had seen American products before the war, and many were inferior to German equivalents. We assumed American military equipment would be the same, but it wasn't. No. When we examined that first Jeep in 1942, we realized we had made a fundamental error. We had confused peacetime quality with wartime effectiveness. Your Jeep wasn't better engineered than our Kübelwagen in absolute terms. It was better designed for mass production and field conditions. In total war, that proved decisive. The American nodded. Yeah. We build adequate products quickly and in huge quantities. Exactly. They stood in silence for a moment. Two mechanics from opposing sides united by shared understanding of what had actually determined the war's outcome. The repatriation process began in late 1945. German prisoners boarded ships for the journey home. One mechanic arrived in Bremen in January 1946, processing through Allied control stations before being released. The city was ruins. Rubble stretched in every direction. But amid the destruction, he noticed something. American vehicles everywhere. Jeeps carrying Allied officers through the shattered streets. Trucks delivering relief supplies. Motor pools where German civilians worked alongside Allied soldiers. He approached one motor pool, introducing himself to the American captain in command. His English, learned during years of captivity, was serviceable. "Sir, I am a former Oberfeldwebel of the Afrika Korps, recently repatriated from Camp Hearne, Texas. I am a trained vehicle mechanic with experience maintaining American equipment. Are you hiring civilian workers?" The captain examined his identification papers. "Says here you worked in our motor pool in Texas, that right?" Yes, sir. 2 years. The captain made a note. We need mechanics desperately. Most German mechanics either died in the war or are still in POW camps. You can start tomorrow. Pay is in occupation script, redeemable for rations and necessities. And so the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself employed by the army he had fought against, maintaining the same vehicles he had once examined as enemy equipment. The Allies needed mechanics. He needed work. The war was over. Life continued. Over the following months, he witnessed the beginning of Germany's reconstruction. American aid poured in, distributed with the same efficiency that had won the war. Food, medicine, construction materials, all arrived in American trucks, coordinated by American planners who approached Germany's rebuilding systematically. He worked in the motor pool, training young Germans in American maintenance techniques. Many of his students were former Wehrmacht soldiers like himself, men who needed civilian skills in a Germany that would no longer have a military. He taught them what he had observed: simplicity over sophistication, functionality over perfection, results over theory. These were lessons learned from American vehicles applicable to rebuilding German manufacturing. By 1947, he had been promoted to supervisor of the motor pool's German civilian staff. The former Afrika Korps Master Sergeant Mechanic, whom we shall call Klaus Richter, was not a name that would feature in history books, yet his work in Bremen was laying the foundations for the future. In 1948, the flow of aid intensified with the Marshall Plan. Its function was not merely charity, but an injection of capital and, crucially, an organizational model. America was not just sending grain and machinery, it was exporting its production philosophy. Richter and his men were no longer just repairing occupation vehicles. They were at the heart of the logistics fueling the recovery. When the first German factories secured funding to restart, Richter found himself acting as an unofficial consultant. The management of nascent automotive companies like Volkswagen and Daimler-Benz, while restoring their tradition of engineering excellence, could no longer ignore the lesson of the war. The new German industrial philosophy became a hybrid. It maintained the precision and craftsmanship for which German engineering was renowned, but adopted the American principles of standardization and interchangeability of components. It was no longer about building the perfect vehicle, but about building an excellent, producible vehicle. Volkswagen, formerly the producer of the Kübelwagen, became the prime example. Its rebirth occurred under the leadership of Heinz Nordhoff, who maintained the basic design of the Beetle, an engineering marvel, but industrialized its production with Fordist methods. Massive assembly lines, simple components, and a design that allowed semi-skilled workers to maintain a very high production pace. The Beetle, with its simple, reliable engine, was, in a sense, the civilian German version of the Jeep, a rugged vehicle easy to repair and produced in numbers never before seen in Europe. The German economic miracle, Wirtschaftswunder, was no accident. It was the direct result of this synthesis of German precision and American production capacity. By the mid-1950s, German industry had surpassed pre-war levels. Richter continued to work in the automotive sector post-occupation, joining one of the emerging major spare parts companies in Bremen. He often recalled the insight of the American sergeant in the motor pool. Logistics is simple because of uniformity. German manufacturers began implementing this concept at all levels. The adoption of unified industry standards, such as the subsequent DIN, Deutsches Institut für Normung, standards, was the formal response to the pre-war logistical chaos. As West Germany reindustrialized, Klaus Richter noted how American civilian vehicles, while remaining complex in some aspects, continued to prioritize ease of maintenance. The cartridge mechanism for filters and key components, the wide tolerances that allowed for quick shop repairs, the widespread availability of repair manuals accessible to everyone. These were all lessons he had brought back from Camp Hearne, Texas. The Jeep's role in the Western Bloc. The irony was not lost. The American industry continued to provide the blueprint. NATO, founded in 1949, was based on full logistical interoperability. When West Germany was authorized to reconstitute its armed forces, the Bundeswehr, in 1955, its primary light reconnaissance vehicle was often the M38, a direct successor to the Willys MB Jeep. German soldiers trained for the Cold War were driving a vehicle whose design philosophy had helped defeat the Reich. In time, the story of the Jeep as the unwitting teacher became a historical anecdote within ex-combatant circles. It was not a topic readily discussed in public. Germans preferred to celebrate the skill of their engineers, but among Afrika Korps veterans, the Jeep held a legendary status. In the 1980s, American and German military historians began collaborating more openly. The testimonies of POW mechanics were reevaluated, and new emphasis was placed on the words of key figures. The video description mentioned General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, who called the Jeep America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. This statement did not refer to firepower, but to the logistical capability and ubiquity of the vehicle in the field. The 1998 reunion. The description specifically mentions the Afrika Korps reunion of 1998. At these gatherings, long-suppressed humor and honesty emerged. It is likely that at this reunion or a similar one, the discussion turned to vehicles. A former Panzer Division Oberleutnant, in a subsequent interview, recounted, "At the end of the war, our biggest concern was the petrol for our panzers, while the Americans worried about finding a parking space for their Jeeps. We had no idea of the scale of their production until we saw their depots. After 1943, the Kübelwagen was a relic. The Jeep was the measuring stick of the war." Klaus Richter, now elderly, likely attended one of these reunions. When asked what he remembered most about the first captured Jeep in North Africa, he didn't mention the four-wheel drive, but the cleanliness and simplicity of the engine bay. It wasn't about how sophisticated it was, but how honest it was. It was a vehicle built without deception, designed for the common man in a mad world. For a German engineer, perfection was the goal. For the Americans, it was the way to get more soldiers and supplies into battle quickly. And in war, speed and reliability outweigh perfection. These concluding statements cement the video's thesis. Material superiority and design philosophy were the decisive factors. Today, the German automotive industry is a global behemoth, synonymous with precision engineering and luxury. But even the most successful German automakers who produce worldwide rely on global suppliers, standardized components, and continuous cycle robotic assembly lines, all principles of mass production that America had pioneered. The Willys MB Jeep ultimately was not just a vehicle. It was a catalytic agent for understanding an unstoppable economic force. It was the symbol of a nation that, despite an initial delay, mobilized its immense resources with a brutal and effective industrial logic. The story of Klaus Richter, the Afrika Korps mechanic who became an architect of the Wirtschaftswunder in the Bremen motor pool, symbolizes the transformation of an entire country. The lesson learned in the North African desert and the POW camps of Texas was not just technical, but philosophical. Modern warfare is won not only by warriors or geniuses, but by the ability to produce and sustain logistics on a scale that the enemy cannot match. The small, rugged Jeep was the embodiment of that truth. It was the vehicle that not only defeated the Wehrmacht but also taught its enemies how to build their future.